very good evening and welcome. In less than 120 minutes from now, the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, takes the oath of office. It's going to have a reverberation right across the world. Over the next 30 minutes, we bring you an insight on who the man is and what his team is bringing to the table.
A lot of controversies surrounding Donald J. Trump, the president-elect. In some time from now, we'll be calling him President Trump. We will be discussing Donald J. Trump, his biography in so many ways than one, in terms of what he's achieved in so many years and how did he come to become the next President of the United States of America, as also the controversial theme and the issues surrounding each member of his cabinet.
Joining us on the broadcast, Simon Marks is our correspondent there in Washington. He's going to be tracking the oath of office as well as the entire inaugural ceremony with us. Munish Gupta, senior journalist, joining us in the studios here in Delhi. Richard Russo joining us also in Delhi. Vivek Karchu, former Secretary of the MEA, is with us, as is Raymond Vickery, joining us via Skype. He's the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Trade and Development under Bill Clinton. Let's open up this conversation with the fundamentals. Who is this man, Donald J. Trump? Raymond Vickery with us. Mr. Vickery, help us understand who is this man and what does he bring to the table tonight?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to understand his background. And his background is in real estate development and in reality television. He has honed the skills of being able to attract and communicate through reality television. He has looked at everything as a deal. He is a foremost developer, and he has interest all over the world, including the United States, including in India, from the United States. So I think that those are the two fundamentals in understanding where he comes from. He's an expert communicator in tweeting and has been able to grab the attention of people in the United States who are dissatisfied with the status quo.
Well, Ray, you've put it as any person who has been a part of the Democratic administration and who has been a part of the Democratic administration and who has been a part of campaigns for decades now, can very rightly put it. But let me go across to Mr. Vivek Karchu. Mr. Karchu, many thanks for joining us here. But Raymond Vickery has made it very clear that there is an entire section that still questions the president-elect. What do you think? And the entire personality of Donald J. Trump, while as an industrialist, as a businessman, as a reality show host, is very different from what he's going to take on right now, that is being the president of one of the most powerful countries in the world.
Well, he's assuming an office which is certainly the most powerful, the most influential political office in the world. There's no doubt about it. And this is an office which requires not only communication skills, but also vast powers of absorbing a whole lot of information, of analyzing it in his own mind, and of synthesizing it so that he finally approves the policy options that are placed before him. Till now, he's proved somewhat abrasive, somewhat divisive, and even during this transition period, this divisiveness and his abrasiveness has continued. So now, I think the American people, and not only the American people, but people all over the world will be watching him very closely to see whether he can put all this behind him and emerge as someone who can heal the wounds of a divisive election,
yes,
and who can provide a certain calm to a very worried world.
Well, Ambassador, we know he's no big fan of the media, not the US media, so perhaps we'll have to watch his Twitter feed to find out what he's thinking. Let me just remind our viewers what's happening on your screen. On the extreme right side, those are the latest visuals. That is the cavalcade of the president-elect. He is there with his wife and family early this morning in the United States. He's visited the Arlington Cemetery. These are part of the rituals of inauguration. He's expected to head towards the Capitol, down Pennsylvania Avenue, and that the U.S. Chief Justice to swear him in at about 10:17 India time tonight. If I can, let me pull in Mr. Munish Gupta into this conversation. Mr. Munish Gupta, just help us understand this individual. He's had an extremely complicated, extremely checkered past. He's one of the oldest presidents at 70 to take on the oath of office, and he's a maverick by any standards.
You know, I think in many ways America threw up a maverick. America wanted to throw up a maverick. And now that we have him, and we've seen the rhetoric during the election campaign and the transition, as Mr. Kajju put it, we are going to have to wait and watch and see what he actually delivers in terms of policy to the joint houses of Congress and converts that into action. Yes, the whole world is watching with bated breath, and so with the rest of America that has been up in arms against him and protesting on the streets. But I would not go too far to say that an American president can completely change the ethos, the policy, and the actions of that great country. I lived there, and I've been living there for 31 years. And I don't think Trump is going to do something scintillating and sensational. So let's wait and watch. But that's right, Trump is his own man. In many ways, when India elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they threw up a nationalist, somebody with a completely different fervor, flavor, and over a 2.5-year period, you know, we are trying him. And we've come to grips with what he may want to do for the country and do for a change. So let's see. I'm not giving up on him yet.
Right, Munish, Ambassador Kajju wants to come in over here. Before you just come in, let me just explain what's happening on the screens over there. It's the service that President-elect Donald Trump is attending at St. John's Church, which is right across the White House. That's how the entire ceremony begins every term or tenure that a president begins is with that service at the St. John's Church, after which he will be headed to the White House, where he will be hosted by President Barack Obama and the First Lady, after which he will be headed to the Capitol for the entire ceremony. Ambassador Kajju.
No, I must make a confession. I had thought that once he has won the election, President-elect Trump will begin the process of healing America. And I said this on television, in fact on your channel, and I've been proved wrong. For the transition period, which was the period where the healing process should have begun, has seen no sign of that healing process. And that is why these questions remain, because normally, howsoever maverick a person may be, once he begins to walk the road of getting office after elections, the normal processes of bureaucracy start taking over. He is given a reality check on what he is actually facing, whatever he may have said during the election. But that's not seen till now.
Responsibility might have to temper the man. Raymond Vickery, you know, big fan of Donald J. Trump. Will responsibility temper the man? Will the office keep him in check?
Well, I'm hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. As has just been said, you'd expect healing to start to take place during the interim between the election and the inauguration. That has not taken place. Trump has attacked John Lewis, an icon of the civil rights movement. He's attacked Meryl Streep, one of our foremost actresses. He has continued to use the tweets to attack his enemy and try to give comfort to his friends. Now, today we are to hear a speech which is going to be rather short. They say about 20 minutes. Hopefully we'll hear some of what he was saying on election night about pulling this country together. But he has yet to really recognize that he lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes in the United States. He has yet to recognize that there are people throughout the United States who are really scared at this point.
Right.
I heard one woman this morning talking about losing her health care. And there are people who are of color, who are immigrants, who are of not the majority religion, who are all very concerned.
Ray, so hold your thoughts there. Let's just cut across to Washington, D.C., where the entire ceremony has begun, and go across to our correspondent there, Simon Marks. Simon, a very good morning. You're joining us from Washington, D.C. What's the mood like? A lot of people are expected to attend and to be a part or participate in that oath-taking ceremony, the inauguration, but we're also expecting a lot of protests.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I saw last night that the Reuters news agency was referring to this as a conflicted city. And I think in many ways that's absolutely correct, because on the one hand, Washington, D.C., of course, is serving as the majestic backdrop for the images that you're already seeing and will continue to see over the next several hours here, the backdrop for this peaceful transition of power, which Barack Obama has been at pains to remind Americans is a hallmark of the country's democracy. But on the other hand, Washington, D.C. is also a bit of a liberal haven. I mean, this is a place where the vast majority of voters are firmly loyal to the Democratic Party. Many of them have chosen to leave town outside that central area where the inauguration is taking place. It's a bit of a ghost town on the streets here in Washington, D.C. And as you say, while there are thousands of people that have come from all over the country to celebrate Donald Trump's inauguration and the role that they played, sparking his very unlikely path to the White House, there are also thousands of protesters descending on the city today and particularly again on Saturday. Large protests expected both in Washington, D.C. and in New York by demonstrators who insist that Donald Trump will not be their president.
Simon, what's the hope? Because the oath of office is going to happen in a couple of hours. There's a speech expected. That speech should not only cover what he promised during the electoral campaign, but also to reach out to the majority of the Americans who are not with him. What's the hope tonight from the people you've been speaking to?
Well, look, he's going to have to try and find a way of reaching out to people, but so far he's tried before and hasn't been successful, and that's a reflection of the sort of language and rhetoric that he used on the campaign trail, which was very scorched earth. There isn't much of a path back from it. Look, I think we're sailing into absolutely uncharted waters here. This is not a normal environment, and there are some big tests coming up, and one of them relates to the role that Indians play in the U.S. economy. What's the future of H-1B visas here? Donald Trump has complained about jobs being exported, jobs being given to foreign workers here in the United States, and yet he's appointed to his cabinet men and women, steeped many of them in the area of big business, who philosophically are perhaps less opposed to the idea of H-1B visas being used by Indian workers and workers from other parts of the world. So huge questions here about philosophically what direction is his government going to take, not least because of the tensions that already exist between many of the positions that Donald Trump has laid out and the positions of his cabinet members, which in many cases are at odds with the president-elect.
Right, Simon, we will be discussing the entire India policy of the United States of America in just a bit from now, but focusing on what is happening on the ground over there. It's in this day and age, we've been talking about mobilization, and like you're saying, while there are a lot who are not watching the television, who are not watching telly, or not in D.C., there are many who have come down to D.C. Is this mobilization by the Trump team that we're seeing on the ground?
Oh, no question about that. Look, you cannot take away from the fact that Donald Trump has presided over an absolutely extraordinary political achievement here. When Mitt Romney lost the presidential election in 2012 to Barack Obama, the Republicans came out of that bruising defeat, and most Republicans said, what we need to do is we need to broaden our base. We need to reach out to African-American voters, to Latino voters, to voters of all stripes in a bid to expand our base. Donald Trump came along and said, well, actually, you don't need to do that at all. You just need to reflect the interests of predominantly white, predominantly working-class voters. That's what he did in last year's election campaign, and to the amazement of the political elites here in Washington, D.C., the great and the good, the pundits, the salons of Washington, D.C., he pulled it off. This is an extraordinary achievement by a man with no previous political experience, but after he's sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts in, a couple of hours' time, that's when the hard stuff begins.
Simon, there's been a lot of waiting and telling about this presidency. The number one cause, of course, has been what happens to the Trump organization. What happens to it? Have you got any news, or whether he's passing it off to a trust or not?
Well, he's not passing it off to a blind trust. He says that he's putting his ownership interest into a trust. that will be controlled by his two sons, not by his daughter, because she and her husband are moving here to Washington, D.C. to play a role in government. No independent ethics observer, including the Government Office of Ethics, believes that what Donald Trump is doing with his businesses passes muster and is sufficient to avoid conflict of interest allegations from developing, but he insists that as President of the United States, he rises above any conflict of interest difficulties. I think one of the stories of the next 4 years is whether, in fact, that proves to be the case.
Right, Simon, stay on with us. If I could just go back to the personality question that we've been talking about. Donald J. Trump took a call, Ambassador Kajju, of making those important calls to foreign leaders on his own without any consultation by or with the State Department officials or even the White House. What do you make of that?
I think it's as a former diplomat, all that I can say is that without staff advice, without the advice of experts, if a political leader of as powerful a political leader as Donald Trump is going to be in less than a couple of hours, proceeds on his own, then he's virtually flying blind. Howsoever good his knowledge base may be personally, howsoever good may be his instincts, because the issues of the modern world are far too complex without proceeding with expert advice. So I feel terribly worried and anxious on this score. And I do believe that this worry and anxiety is shared by the American establishment as a whole.
Okay, all right. Simon Marks, I know you're coming back to us in about 40 minutes in time. We'll let you get on and we'll see you at the top of the hour. Now, Munish Gupta, you wanted to come in. Go ahead.
You know, I agree with what Ambassador Kajju had said, but you have to
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Gupta. Just quick update on the visuals you're getting. These are live visuals coming. I'm presuming this is from the White House. And we're expecting, of course, President Obama to be hosting Donald Trump right before the oath-taking takes place, after which President Obama will take a chopper out and there will be a cavalcade coming in with the new President of the United States. That is the Marine Band at the White House that is playing up, and you can imagine they'll be playing Hail to the Chief in just a short point of time. Munish Gupta, go ahead.
You know, we've talked about this. There has been all the rhetoric. There is Trump appealed to a part of America that had not seen people appeal to them for a long time, especially since George Bush Jr. And that part is those people want to hear him again. Whether you call it rhetoric or you call it blasé comments by Trump, that's what gave him the votes. Until he came into office, with all the protests that you go seeing on the streets of New York and Washington, he had to appease this set of people who brought him to office. So I believe that no president of the United States of America is going to go exactly where Trump probably said where he was going.
It was difficult. It was difficult to take Raymond Vickery. It was difficult to take him seriously during the campaign, but it was difficult to take George W. Bush seriously. And he stuck around in the White House for 8 years.
Well, that's exactly right. And we can't think that this is just going to be a short-term problem here. We are in uncharted waters. I do think it's time for India to step up. The United States and India are the two greatest democracies in the world. We are going to have a president who sometimes flies blind and acts impetuously. That is not a characteristic of India and the Indian democracy. I would expect that one thing people can agree on in the United States, by and large, is that India and the United States ought to be partners. Well, it's time for India to really step forward in terms of partnership, to give advice, to give counsel.
How do you think India can really help over here, help matters in the United States of America?
How do you think India can do that? I think India can do that through your Prime Minister. I think that there is a desire on the part of Trump to be seen and to be liked by other people, particularly people that he considers to be strong leaders. And I think that your prime minister should play a role in that even more strongly than he has with President Obama. I think that there ought to be an invitation very early on for either Prime Minister Modi to come to the United States, certainly from Prime Minister Modi for Trump to come to India so he can see for himself what it means to have people who are working in information technology. Right. So some of the edge will be taken off of this anti-H-1B visa tear which he seems to be on. Those are ways in which it seems to me India can step up and help out in this hour of need for democracy worldwide.
Right. Ray, Munish wants to come in, but just before that, Ambassador Kaju, this is the first time we're hearing, maybe the first time we're hearing so many people from the United States of America looking at countries such as India to come to US's rescue.
I think it's a little amazing. And if I were, and I think that Mr. Trump has been thrown up through a purely American domestic process which has rebelled in a certain sense. Vast sections have rebelled against the processes of globalization. Now, in India, we think that an open system, open trading system, open migration system, etc. is good. So, herein, of course, there will have to be very, very detailed conversations between our leadership and Mr. Trump so that a middle ground can be found. But one last point, I do think that on the visa issue, a certain reality check will have to come to the Trump administration because there are certain processes which are inevitable. And Indians who are good at these, in these matters, will be required.
Yeah, so the hardball negotiation needs to come from our end also. George W. Bush arriving there at the U.S. Capitol. Of course, 3 former presidents and the First Lady is expected to be there. Barbara Bush with him. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are expected to follow right after this. They are going to be doing it in the order of precedence. Let's quickly open this up to the Team Trump because we're going to be discussing the India-based issues on immigration, on H-1B visas, crucially on terror, on Pakistan, on China at the top of 9 o'clock as we build up to that inaugural. Let's have a look at Team Trump. We're going to put the graphics on your screens. Let's start, if I can, Mr. Vikri. Rex Tillerson, very matter-of-fact man, a very hard-nosed negotiator for ExxonMobil. He's got a footprint right across the globe, not only in Russia. How's he going to deal with countries like India?
Well, I think Rex Tillerson has a world of experience. And that he can be a steadying hand. I think that one of the things which has bothered people in the hearings has been his closeness to Russia, which manifestly interfered in our elections. I do think that when you're the head of ExxonMobil, the largest oil and gas company in the world, if not the largest company, period, you're going to have a certain orientation in terms of what ought to happen in regard to energy. That isn't always going to be in the best interest of all concerned. But I think on balance, people like Tillerson, like Mathis at Defense will provide somewhat of a steadying hand. But to say again, we are in uncharted waters. It will not happen overnight, anything. A policy in the United States, like in India, is like turning a great battleship. It does not turn immediately and sharply. Nevertheless, over a period of time, there will be changes.
Right. Munish, if I could come to you about the Trump team. 3 very important people are James Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Jeff Sessions. But in all the confirmation hearings, quite a few of them, and in their statements, they went against what Trump was doing or saying during his campaigns, be it Russia, the stand on Russia, the stand on Iran deal, or for that matter, ban on Muslims.
You have to understand, Trump's personality, charisma, charm, his background are going to play a lot of role in who he picks, how he molds himself to them, and how they mold themselves to him. This is a first off for this man, who's a billionaire, who's a maverick, who's whatever he is. You will see a lot of reflection in trying to put him on a track of a US president by those around him who will suggest certain names, and people will come up for confirmations, and the rest of the job the US Congress will do by bringing him back on track. Because you see, an American president doesn't act or work on his own by himself. There is, just like Ray said, there is a very strong institution in the US Congress that can turn things around and say, sorry, no.
Okay.
And that's what is going to happen.
All right, gentlemen, we are out of time, and we're going to carry on this coverage as we get closer to the inauguration from the top of 9 India time onwards. You can see live visuals, and I'm going to leave you once with the live visuals. They're coming in from Washington, Pennsylvania Avenue, the capital, where the cavalcades of the former presidents are arriving there on the left side of your screens. At about 10:17 Indian time is when the oath of office will be taken by Donald J. Trump. You're expecting a 20-minute speech after that. We'll be back non-stop live from the top of 9 downwards for me and Geeta Mohan right now. We slip into a short break. On the other side, Madhav to take you through the latest developments out of Tamil Nadu.